To start my postcards, I'm using a chipboard base. This is a 4x6 piece of chipboard. I actually buy these on Etsy, cut by somebody who has better cutting equipment than I do. But if you have mad cutting skills, you can definitely cut this from a blank chipboard or from cereal box packaging, whatever you like. You can also use watercolor paper blanks for this. I buy pads of watercolor paper in the same size, and this is a great standard postcard size. So obviously these are brown on both sides, and I don't want brown postcards. So I'm going to start by giving these a coat of gesso on both sides. Gesso on the front because I want to paint, and gesso on the back side because it's white and it will make a writable surface for me that can be scanned by the post office. Always try to keep the post office happy by using white postcard backs with black ink, because their scanners will read it better. And you don't want your postcard to get mangled at the post office. So I'm just going to coat the first side of these with gesso, let them dry, and then flip them over and coat the other side. So now that one side is dry, I'm gessoing the back side. And so why do I gesso before I paint? Because chipboard sucks paint. It's very absorbent, and it's not a good surface to paint on directly. Gesso is designed as a primer for acrylics, so it makes this surface paintable. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that I am using an old phone book as my surface to paint on because I want to protect my work table. Even though it's covered with paper, gessoing like this is very messy. There's a lot of fallout, and doing it on an old phone book allows me to have a clean surface for each postcard. And I can just tear off and have a fresh surface whenever I want to. So if you don't have old phone books, if they are no longer a thing where you live, junk mail also works. Just be careful not to drag too much of the ink onto your surface. While my gesso is drying, I'm going to cut out my images, and I printed these out on 32-pound laser print paper, which is a very bright, smooth surface. It's a little heavier than normal copy paper, and I find it a great surface to paint on. And I'm using some small sharp scissors because this is a lot of fussy cutting. I'm just going to cut right on the black lines. And for this sun, what I'm going to do, rather than trying to turn the corner and cut back out, I'm going to cut inward on each side of these rays to get rid of what's in between them. Just like that. That way, I preserve that nice sharp V where the two rays come together. Cutting on the black lines. until I end up with this. And the reason it's not cut all the way around is because I'm going to be hanging some of this off the edge. So I've cut just enough of it that this part isn't going to show. And if it did, I would go ahead and keep cutting the sections that did show, but I think this is pretty much how it's going to look once I get it on there. While I have my gesso out, I'm going to go ahead and give a light coat to these images that I've cut out. And I'm doing this because I'm going to paint on these as well. And this heavy laser print paper allows me to do this without too much curling. It'll curl a little bit when it first gets wet with the gesso, which is why I'm just doing a very light coat. But it will flatten back out as it dries. And this gives me a nice paintable ground. And my gesso is just as thin as I can get it so that I can still see all of the line work underneath. I'm going to need that when I'm painting. And you'll notice that the two images that I cut out, even though they're the same image, I've cut them differently. Just because I'm using the same image doesn't mean the finished postcard has to look the same. So I'm going to be hanging these off of different edges, and maybe I'll do slightly different colors as well. While the gesso on the images is drying, I can base coat my postcards. And what I'm going to try to do here is hold these postcards flat and brush the paint outward. What I'm trying to do is keep from getting any of the blue paint on the back side of this, which I've already gessoed white and want to keep white. There we go. Here are two postcards that I've base coated in slightly different colors of blue. And you'll notice that it's kind of streaky and blotchy, and that's okay because I'm doing a sky background here. And I'm going to use my images to tell me where I should do some clouds. And it looks like this bottom corner down here and this bottom corner down here and maybe a little up at the top. But I really don't need to do any along the right side because that's mostly going to be covered with sun. So I have a damp piece of sea sponge, damp but not wet. I can't squeeze any water out of it. And I'm just going to tap that into the white paint and get it a little wet. Not a lot of paint, just a tiny bit. And I'm going to add some clouds. And if I want to blend, I can use the back end of the sponge that doesn't have any paint on it. Just like that. And that's about all I need for this sun. Just a tiny little bit of cloud in the background. So now that my background is dry, I can go ahead and apply the image. This is just a glue stick. And I am working from the center outward to make sure that I don't wrinkle or fold the rays. a light coat of glue, making sure I get all these little tips. And I'm going to cover it up with some wax paper and roll it with a brayer. This will give me some good contact between the glue and the surface and make it nice and flat. And the wax paper is mostly just to protect the image from getting glue rolled all over it. If I have any ooze that's coming out of the sides, I don't want to end up with glue all over my surface. And then I can just trim this away. There we go. So now this design is pretty much color by numbers. Just fill in the sections with the colors of paint I've chosen. And I picked 3 colors in the yellow and orange range. So I have a light, a medium, and a dark. So now I can just fill in, and I'm going to start with the lightest color in the center, and then use my other 2 colors for the rays. And I'm painting over some of the black line work. And I'm going to come back in with a Sharpie later. And add it back in. This craft acrylic is very sheer. It's almost like a glaze. So all the black work, the black line work shows through the paint. So that's where that really sheer coat of gesso helps. Because I'm not covering up my original design. You can still see it glowing through the layers. So here's my painted sun, and you can see that the black lines show really well through the paint. And I find that's the case with all but the very darkest colors of craft acrylics. So now I'm just going to take a Sharpie and punch those lines up a little bit. I have Sharpies in two sizes here. These are the regular ones, and then I also have a fine point that I can use for smaller details. But I find that this size works really well for me. It's a nice bold black line. And I fill in all the face details. I could do this with black paint, but I like the control of the Sharpie better. So this finer point pen is kind of fun to use just to add little swirlies to the tips of some of these rays. It's nice to give a little variety in the size of line that you use, and the different tips of the Sharpies allow for that. So that's why I usually use more than one size. I don't want to add too many, just a few. And then maybe one right here. And then I just want to add a little bit of spark to the eye. So I'm going to take some white paint, and you can do this with a white gel pen or a very fine white paint pen. Just add one little dot, and you want to add it off center and on the same side. So if you go to the right of center, do it the same way on both eyes. And just that much adds a little spark and a little personality to your face. Now that this is dried, I'm just going to add a very light coat of matte medium. And I'm doing this for two reasons. The first one is to seal it, obviously, because this is going to go through the mail, and I want to make sure that it arrives in good shape. The other reason is that I applied this image with glue stick, and although it's pretty well stuck, I've had some problems lately with the glue sticks that I'm using not surviving their trip through the mail, so pieces falling off. So this will help keep this painted piece on its background, and hopefully it will arrive at its destination in good shape. There we go. this is all done and ready to be mailed.